Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be starting the webinar in about 2 minutes. I just wanted to do a quick audio check. If you are having difficulty hearing me, if you could send a chat letting us know if it's cracking or breaking up, if you're having any difficulty, I would appreciate that. And otherwise, we'll get ready in about 2 more minutes. Thanks.
The one day over the whole science thing. June 20th, and it's with the only one that's going right now is Christy LeBond and Sharon Hall for that day. And I thought instead of the grade level, I would really rather. And you got the big picture about all of it.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:01, and we're going to get started with the webinar, and hopefully we will be done within the hour. That is my intention. My name is Renee Polakovic. I'm the Deputy Director of CPM, and today we're just going to talk about the 18-19 school planning tool that is set to open next week, and hopefully give you key information that will allow you to get into the system, use the tool, complete the plans, and then also review and approve them at the district level within the timeline. So with that, we're just going to get started. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to send them through the chat, and we will either probably wait to the very end to answer them. That's usually the easiest, that we can get through all the content. But please feel free to send your questions through the chat if you need to throughout the presentation. So the overview for the content we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about timelines and due dates. We're going to talk about the pilot, the district and school planning pilot, and updates on that very briefly. And then we're going to spend most of our time going through the planning tool itself, the different sections, and discuss the requirements for each section, and then discuss exemplar responses as far as what's required, and then what would be an excellent response for each one of the areas. We're going to talk about plan components and the school-wide budget, E-plan review and approval of school plans, and then share some resources that are available, and at the end provide some contact information for everyone. Okay, so our timeline and due dates. This year our timeline for LEA plans was all plans were due on March 1st. As of today, we have 130 of 147 plans approved, so we are almost there. We're a little beyond our deadline, but we're really trying hard to make sure that plans are reviewed consistently using the new rubric that was developed for district plan review, and making sure that the right technical assistance is provided so that we can support quality plan development. So we're close, but we're not quite there yet. The goals and strategies from those approved plans will roll into school plans that will open next week. So school planning tool, as we've been saying for a couple of months, will open May 1st as planned, and all of those goals and strategies that are in those district plans will roll into each school's plan. The district goals and strategies are then extended to address school-specific needs, and those school plans are due in E-plan on September 1st, with all plans being approved by districts by October 1st. The school planning process is controlled by the district. You are in charge of reviewing and approving those plans, and as long as they're done within the timelines, the state will not have a role in this process. That will be a little different for priority schools, and that's something that will be part of more information to come. But as of when we're just talking about general planning requirements for schools, this is a district-led process. So school plan data for 18-19, most of the data tables that you're going to see in the school planning tool will have 3 years of data, and these are the 3 years of data that will be displayed. So 14-15, 15-16, and 16-17. We are a year behind, so those are the 3 years that we will be able to preload for you. If you have other data, whether it be additional state assessment data that would be available when you're working on school plans, you can also include that and talk about that in the narrative responses that you provide, and you can also look at local level data. But this is the data that we will be able to preload into the tables for you. Some of the other tables, some of the tables within the tool do not have 3 years of data. However, when you find those tables, it'll clearly show what year it is and why it's only maybe 2 years, or if it's a different set of years. But for the most part, you're going to see those 3 years. All the data will be uploaded for you when you open it up May 1st. That data will all be there for you. So the pilot planning updates. I just quickly want to go through where we are with the planning pilot. We've been talking about this quite a bit over the last year, and really particularly over the last 6 months. We have 11 districts that have submitted LEA plans using the new pilot tool as part of the pilot, and all of those schools within those 11 districts will now also use that new planning tool to submit their school plans, to develop and submit those. The opening date is the same for pilot schools, which is May 1st, and the deadlines are the same, September 1st and October 1st. So everyone is consistent as far as timelines and expectations. It's just those 11 districts will be using a different tool, and that tool will be available to only them this year. So our webinar today is really focused on the traditional E-plan tool and not this pilot tool. But just so everyone knows, even though we're using 2 different tools, everyone's using the same timeline. We're gathering feedback. We'll continue to gather feedback on the pilot planning tool over the next, we've been collecting for a while, and we'll continue to collect as we go through the remainder of the process. We'll have some training, webinars, and demonstrations on the new planning tool for all districts. Beginning late summer, you'll start hearing information about that, and you'll be involved in those webinars and trainings. We'll collect more feedback from districts as you go through the trainings and the demonstrations and get into the system and start looking around. We will collect feedback again from you and make some final tweaks, make some updates that might be necessary as a result of your feedback. And then all districts will be able to utilize the new planning tool, both district and school level, for your development and submission of 19-20 plans. So now really the meat of the presentation is the planning tool needs assessment. This is where most of the work is going to take place in the planning process and it's part of the tool. So what I've done is I've taken each planning tool section and I've broken it down. I'm going to talk about the questions that are in each section. I'll display those, and then I'm going to just talk about what's required for each one and then what would be an exemplar. Because what we've done this year is we've created a school-level review rubric for school districts to use as part of your review process and approval process of plans. As I said earlier, this is a district-controlled process, but we felt that since we had a district-level rubric that we used for district-level plans, that we should devise a similar rubric for school level that you could use if you wished. You don't have to use it, but it gives you a good idea of what we believe a plan that does not meet requirements has, a plan that does meet requirements, and then what one that is exemplary and goes above and beyond. So that rubric will be available today when you're finished. It will be available in ePlan in the TDOE resources. It's available for you to look at. Again, not necessary to use it, but it's a tool for you if you want to. So I've developed the rest of the most of this presentation around what each question requires and then what an exemplary response would be based on the content of that rubric. So the school planning team is required that you have a school planning team and there are certain members required. And this question just asks you to identify all those members and then identify them by title, no names, by title, and then describe how the school actively and consistently involves all those stakeholders in the development of the plan and how it's regularly monitored and revised based on student needs. So when you're doing that school planning team response, the requirements are, at a minimum, you have to have the minimum membership. So all of those individual titles that are listed in the question, you've got to at least have membership from those at a minimum. The other requirement is that they be involved in the development, review, and update of the plan. So in your response to that second question about how you're going to include the team, you have to at least discuss development, review, and update in a general way to meet the requirements. For an exemplar, a plan that would be in addition to what the minimum requirements are, this is a plan that is really meeting the mark and going beyond. You would have more than one parent community representative. You might have multiple grade level teachers. You could have stakeholders to represent major student groups, multiple opportunities for team collaboration throughout the year, and a timeline, year-long timeline for reviewing data, gathering input, making plan adjustments, and gauging progress towards goals. So that would be an exemplary response. You can just do the minimum, which is fine, but this would be an exemplary response. The next section is academic data, elementary and secondary, all content areas. I've only got one slide for this because every one of the content areas, elementary and secondary, have these same two questions. One is to analyze data for students, talk about the progresses and challenges and identifying the causes for each, and then looking at progresses and challenges of students overall and then in the traditional subgroups, and then giving specific examples and include local data analyzed as part of that needs assessment. Here's where you would bring in other data. If you have other data to use aside from what's been loaded into ePlan, you would introduce it in response to this question. The second question then is if the school has an EL subgroup, describe how the data for the ELs will be used to inform the ESL instructional program. So on the academic requirements, on the academic data requirements, this is what we're looking at a minimum, that you address progress and challenges in all the content areas and all applicable subgroups. So if there's a subgroup identified with data, you would need to make sure that that's addressed in progresses and challenges in the response, along with all students in all the content areas. Identify at least one root cause for each content area and subgroup to explain the progresses and challenges. Reflect on some of prior year strategies and impact on outcomes. And then details on the EL data analysis and how it will inform the ESL instructional program. So at a minimum, these things must be included in the response in order for this section to be meet requirements. An exemplar example of academic data response would be an in-depth description of the progresses and challenges for all content areas and applicable subgroups. The key change there is it's in-depth. So one, meeting the requirement is just giving a general overview, but an exemplar would be going into real detail about the progresses and challenges, drilling down to specify very unique situations that you found as part of the needs assessment. More than one root cause for the majority of the content areas and subgroups. So not just meeting the requirement of, okay, I've got a root cause for every single one. Maybe you've identified a couple. Well, if you talk about those, you've gone above and beyond and providing an explanation for the reasons for that progress and for those progresses and challenges. An in-depth description of prior year strategies and impact on outcomes. So really, again, it's looking at the level of the response and how much detail and description that you provide. And then last, a detailed and in-depth summary of the EL data and the expected positive impact on the ESL program. So there the difference is not just that this is how we're going to change our ESL program, but this is why we think we should change it, and this is the positive impact that we believe it will have on the ESL program. That would be an exemplary response to that question. The next section is college and career readiness. This section has two questions for schools. The first is analyzing the school's ACT data and summarizing the progresses and challenges in increasing the number of students who reach those college-ready benchmarks and score at or above 21. And then describing how the school will address those challenges and looking at that across subjects and different subgroups. The second question is reviewing the school's graduation data and summarizing the progresses and challenges students are facing, especially if the graduation rates are below 90%, and then looking again at overall students and among different subgroups. If you have an elementary school, the second question would be not applicable because you don't have graduation rate data. But if you do have a graduating class in your school, you would have to address that second question. Some requirements for this section, looking at all ACT and graduation rate data as part of the analysis, and then giving a general description of the progresses and challenges for all content areas and applicable subgroups. So looking at every subgroup. If there are subgroups excluded, that doesn't meet the requirements. And on the rubric, it will say that is on that type of response that doesn't address all the subgroups is not acceptable or below standard. You need a general alignment of the progresses and challenges between ACT and graduation rate from the data provided. So if the data provided says one thing, but then the progresses and challenges speak to something entirely different, that would not meet the requirements. But if there's general alignment and you can make the assumption, you can see the connection between the challenges and the progresses identified and the data, then that would be an acceptable response. Information regarding the goal of increasing those students that are reaching this 21 on the ACT. So speaking about how you're going to do that, any information at all on that would be an acceptable response, and then at least one way to address that challenge. So you have to at least address a challenge and then talk about at least one way to address the challenge that has been identified. An exemplar for this section would be a detailed analysis and description of the progresses and challenges around ACT and graduation rate for all those areas, but a very detailed analysis, drilling down again into the specifics and maybe identifying some key subgroups that have a more difficult need to address or have a progress that is something unique and you want to duplicate somewhere else. A direct alignment of progress and challenges between ACT and grad rate. So it's not just a general where you have to kind of think about it a little bit and say, okay, I see how these connect, where it's an absolute direct one-to-one alignment between what they said the problems were and what the challenges, what the challenges and progresses are and what the graduation and ACT data says. Information regarding the goal of increasing the number of students towards improving and getting a 21 on the ACT. So this is really the same as the meets requirement. You have to address what you're going to do and how far you are from that goal. The difference here is that you have to have more than one way to address that. So on meeting requirements, you have to have at least one. An exemplar would be various methods for addressing that identified need. School climate and culture is another section in the school plan. The requirements here are an analysis. Oh, did we miss the question? Nope, I did. I missed the question. I have a slide missing, so I apologize. On the school climate and culture, what they're asking for is an analysis of chronic absenteeism, enrollment, and discipline data, and a general description of the progresses and challenges for all those content areas. A general alignment of progresses and challenges to data and analysis provided. You have to have at least one step to be taken to increase opportunities to learn, at least one step to be taken to reduce lost instructional time due to student discipline, analysis of school climate data, and at least one priority for providing safe, supportive, and healthy environment, and at least one way to address the identified priority. So here, this one, there's lots of data here on enrollment, there's data on chronic absenteeism, there's data on discipline, suspensions, expulsion. So you're going to be answering questions in regard to all of that. And the required answers must have at least these things in them. An exemplary answer in school climate and culture to these to the questions would be an analysis of chronic absenteeism, enrollment, and discipline data, and a detailed description of the progress and challenges. And you're going to see that you've probably seen the pattern up to this point, is that there's a difference between the required and the exemplar in the detail, how much detail and how much extra information is provided, because that goes to the level of needs assessment that has been conducted, if it's a cursory needs assessment or if it was one where a lot of time was taken to drill down into data, look across data sets, across subgroups, and see where there might be some correlation. So again, detailed description, a direct alignment of progresses and challenges to data and analysis provided. That's one of the things that we're really trying to push, is that not only do the schools provide progresses and challenges, but it aligns to the data. We've found that a lot of times there's progresses and challenges listed, but it does not really match up with the data and the needs assessment that has been conducted. So we've tried to structure the rubric so that you can say, you've done both pieces, but there's no alignment between the two. So this would be a direct alignment. More than one step to be taken to increase opportunities to learn and reduce lost instructional time due to student discipline. So there it's more than one. If you have a discipline issue or you have discipline issues, you have more than one strategy, or it's not just a hit or miss. You have a triage approach where you have several things going on at one time. An analysis of school climate data and more than one priority for providing safe, supportive, and healthy environments, and then more than one way to address the identified priority. So again, multiple ways to address the problem and more detail. Human capital, on this one there's no automated data provided for human capital. All of that automated data is at the district level, and it's not data that we are able to drill down and get to at the school level. So the only thing required here as far as data, this is the one page in the school plan where there is data entry by the school. All the other data is pre-filled. And here we're asking for principal tenure, teacher years of experience, teacher levels, and teacher attendance rate. And there's 3 years of data that would need to be entered. So that is something that schools would need to provide. Here are the questions in this section. How are new teachers supported in the school? What strategies are currently in place to generate growth among new hires? What retention practices, incentives, or growth opportunities are in place, specifically for those teachers who are high performers, and they've shown that over time? And what procedures are in place to ensure that your low-income and minority students are not being taught at a higher rate than other students by those ineffective, inexperienced, or out-of-field teachers? And then it goes on to ask for steps that you would take in order to address those disparities if identified. So the requirements here that we would want to see is a description of at least one support provided to new teachers, at least one thing that's being done for new teachers in support of their growth and sustaining them in the position, a description of at least one strategy in place to promote growth among new teachers. So not only support, but then how are you going to grow them, well, at least one strategy for that. A description of at least one retention practice, incentive or growth opportunity for those highly effective teachers. So not just making sure that you're not just looking at new teachers, but you're also looking at your high performers to try to make sure that you can maintain that capacity in the school. A general description of the process for reviewing and analyzing teacher placements and assignments of those teachers that have the lower effective rates, inexperienced teachers, and out-of-field teachers. So a description of how you're going to do that at the school level, what data will be analyzed, when it would be analyzed, those kinds of things. And then at least one strategy. If you find disparities, what would you do in that school if you were to identify a disparity? An exemplar response on this section would be a description of more than one support. Again, one is fine, but more than one would be exemplary. A description of more than one strategy for promoting growth among new teachers. So multiple strategies for your new teachers, more than one retention practice for the incentives and programs for those highly effective teachers. Detailed description of the process for reviewing and analyzing teacher placements and assignments. The detail here would be maybe how often you're going to do it. Is it a once and done, or do you do it mid-year as well as beginning of year? Who's involved in that process? Any detail at all to provide more information shows that more thought and probably more action will take place on this analysis of data. And then again, more than one strategy to address the disparities that might be found, if they're found, as part of that data review. Then there's the additional areas that are in the plan, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, there's 4 additional areas. I'm going to list the required questions for each of the 4 areas, and then I'll break those down in the same way and show what the requirements are and then the exemplars for each one. So the first is RTI. The question there is describe the school's progress in implementing RTI across all grades and identify root causes and discuss actions needed. Technology access and use, here you're talking about the level of access that students have to technology as part of the instructional program. And then just what challenges do you face in integrating that technology? It's one thing to have technology, it's really another to integrate it into the instructional program effectively. So maybe you have technology, but it's just sitting and it's not really being used effectively. So discussing the challenges you face. What steps is the school taking to address those challenges? And one thing we've added here is including possible funding sources to be used to support the increased access to technology. Because in order to increase technology access, you do need funding. So we're asking that you include at least one possible funding source, if it's Title I, if it's general purpose, whatever funds might be available. It doesn't have to be an amount. It doesn't tie to anything. It's just kind of probing to make sure that if you have a need, that you can identify a possible source. It may not work out, but at least you've thought about it and have a possible source. Professional development is the third in the additional areas section. This is describing how your PD for teachers and school leaders is going to build their capacity, positively impact student achievement, and really address the specific needs of the educators in that school. And then parent and family engagement are the strategies that are going to be implemented for effective parent and family engagement that are meaningful and aligned to student academic achievement in the school. If applicable, they would need to have specific activities that are designed to engage the parents of English learners. If you don't have English learners in a school, this would not be applicable. So this is only if the school has one or more English learners. So now let's go through and see what requirements and exemplars would be for each one of these. The RTI squared, the requirements are that you have data and feedback on RTI, and at least one area of progress that you can identify in implementing across all grades. So you have to address at least one thing as you look through the data and feedback. At least one strength and one weakness, and RTI implementation that is aligned to the data. Again, we're looking to see that not only do you have data and do you have a strength and a weakness, but that they're aligned, that they aren't just completely separate from one another, but they're correlated. At least one root cause for the identified strength and weakness, and at least one action to be taken to address the identified weakness. An exemplar response for RTI would be data and feedback on RTI and more than one area of progress in implementation across grades, multiple strengths and one weakness in RTI squared. Here we're looking for at least looking at more of the strengths and then at least one weakness, but really calling out some of the strengths more specifically. More than one root cause for the identified strength and weakness, and then more than one action to be taken to address those identified weaknesses. So again, multiple strategies rather than just a singular. Requirements for technology, the additional area of technology would be a general description of the data. You have to tell us what data you're looking at and the access that students have to technology as part of the instructional program. We need to know what data you've looked at, that there is data, and that you've considered all of those data sources as part of this additional area. At least one challenge in integrating technology into practice, at least one step to be taken to address that challenge, and at least one possible funding source for increasing access to technology. And if there is no funding source, I think that's acceptable to say at this moment we don't have a funding source, but we need to identify one. That at least shows that you have at least discussed funding and know that it's an issue. Exemplars for technology would be a detailed description of the data available and the access to technology. Again, this is really just drilling into the data more deeply and saying, you know, we have data here, but this is what it means. And when we look at it against this data, it tells us this story, a real detailed, in-depth description. More than one challenge that you have in integrating technology, more than one step to be taken to address that challenge, and then more than one possible funding source. Because if one funding source isn't available, then you have a backup or you have a third. So that's really just looking at the level of planning and development that you have at the school level. The next area is professional development. The requirements for this section would be a general description of the planned PD activities for teachers and leaders, the planned professional development activities that demonstrate a likelihood of positive impact on student achievement. So again, a connection there of give me a description of what your PD activities are, but now you also have to show and explain how you feel those activities are going to have a likelihood of positive impact on teachers and students, not just this is what I'm going to do. You have to show that it's going to have some impact and why you feel it's going to have impact on those teachers and leaders. And then the professional development activities must address at least one of the identified needs within the school's needs assessment. So professional development should be supporting the identified needs. So at least one need has to be addressed in the professional development. An exemplar would be a very specific plan for professional development, and that would be talking about timelines, who's involved, what follow-up activities, is this for teachers, is this for leaders? So really a very detailed plan for professional development, even if it's just a snapshot of a larger plan and pulling it into the school plan to say this is what we want to do. It would include a lot more detail than just the minimum required. The activities here would have proven effectiveness and the measures that would be used to determine impact. So it's not just, hey, we think this is going to have a real likelihood of impacting student achievement and teacher capacity, but we've been using this for several years and we've seen this impact, and this is how we're going to continue to measure the impact. Or this has been used effectively in similar schools with similar populations, and this is how we're going to measure it. And then finally, the professional development activities address more than one of the identified needs. So you're trying to identify professional development that's going to target at least 2 of the needs, maybe more. And then the last area in the additional areas is parent and family engagement. The requirements here would be just a general description of the activities that you're going to be implementing at the school level. At least half of those activities would have to have an academic focus and be aligned to the needs of the school. So this would be, you know, if you list a bunch of activities for parent and family engagement and all of them are more about, you know, a sporting activity or games and things like that, that would not meet this requirement. Now, you can always have those things at parent and family engagement activities, but you need to have some kind of academic focus as well. So here we're saying at least half of the activities would demonstrate that academic focus, and at least one activity to engage the parents and families of English learners if applicable. Again, if there aren't any English learners, this would not be applicable. So exemplars would be a very detailed description, much like the professional development description here, if they include a timeline, the involvement of parents and community members in the planning and in the implementation, methods for measuring success of those activities, any detail that provides the reader with anyone else looking at the plan with information that shows that someone's done an extensive job of looking at these activities, figuring out when they're going to occur, planning them in advance, getting stakeholder involvement, and looking back to see if they were successful. All of the activities described have an academic focus. Now here it's not just half of them, but all of them would have some kind of academic focus and are aligned to the needs of the school. And then more than one activity for those parents and families of ELs, if applicable. The next section, that would be the entire needs assessment though now. So we've gone through every section where you have data, where you have required questions that need response. I've gone over what a required response would have to be and then an exemplar. So now we're going to move into the needs assessment summary. The needs assessment summary is what you do when you're finished with all of those other pieces and you look back across the entire needs assessment and decide, okay, what is working, what's not, what are my priorities. The first thing you have to do is summarize your accomplishments and what's working. It's always good to start positive, so what is it that's working? Looking back, look at this data, what's going well, and why, because you don't want to change the things that are working well. You want to be able to identify them so that you don't mess with them or change them and cause them to become negative or add to a problem in another area. So we ask you to do that first. What is working? Why do you think it's working? Then listing in priority order the top 3 to 5 areas of need identified in the needs assessment. These would be things you can address in the year. So this is not something you want to look at 5 years out. You want to look at what do I think I can accomplish this year based on my priorities that I've identified. You want to prioritize those needs in the most critical areas, and that's where your work begins when you start creating your goals and strategies. Here's an example. I've taken the table from the ePlan planning tool where you actually identify the priority needs, and I've given you some examples. These are very general, but these are things that I would expect that would be seen in some plans. And these would be acceptable. Building teacher, a priority need, building teacher capacity and effective reading strategies. The content areas, ELA. The grade level focus for this particular school was K-3. And then the primary student focus, was it a subgroup? Was it all students? No, it was all students. So that tells me very clearly that in my plan, and in my plan of action and my goals, my strategies, and my use of funds, in that school, there should be something that talks about professional development for reading in general, effective strategies for those K-3 teachers. The second is reducing the number of discipline referrals and missed instructional time. So this particular school maybe had a really high rate of discipline where students were out of school on suspensions, expulsions, and lost instructional time is really becoming a problem. The content area focus is climate, and then the grade level focus is elementary school. It's K through 6. It's not one particular grade. If it was, I would just put that grade, and then it's all students. And then the third is increasing parent-family engagement. I put that content area focus as stakeholder engagement, that it's the entire school, and that it's all students. Some of the priority needs that I've seen over the last couple of years have been very general, and you want to try to steer away from those general priority needs. Like I've seen a lot of people putting under priority need just increasing ELA achievement. Well, I think we all would say that's a priority need, but that's really not identifying the need. That's really kind of restating the goal, and it's not the need. We all know you want to increase those ELA scores, but what is the need? What is it that you said was stopping you from doing that? That is the need. So these are just some examples of things that you could identify as needs, and then how you would break out the different columns on the table in the tool. The requirements for needs assessment summary clearly are the 3 to 5 priority needs. If you have more, that's a problem. That's too many to really deal with in a year, unless there's a really, really strange circumstance where, you know, 2 of the goals have to go together, and it's really conceivable that you could do 6. But I would say 3 to 5, if it's outside of that range, it would need to go back and be looked at again to make sure that those are the proper priorities. Prioritize needs identified generally align to the progresses and challenges identified within the needs assessment. So the whole needs assessment is completed. The priority needs that are listed in the table really do need to generally at least align with what those progresses and challenges are within the needs assessment. If you can't see the alignment, then it's really not an appropriate need. Where did it come from would be the question. How did you identify this as a need? It's not, we've always done it that way, or, you know, I have a teacher in that position, I've got funding I've got to use. No, you need to tie it back to the need that has been identified through the needs assessment. An exemplar for needs assessment summary, your 3 to 5 priority needs, that's not going to change, but you really give a specific priority need, much like the example that I provided in the table, that it's a specific priority need, not a very general umbrella need that a lot of things could fit under, but specific. The need is building capacity in reading strategies. The need is increasing parent and family engagement, and so on. So really being specific, and the grade levels and subgroups, and not just having every single one of them be all schools, all grades, you know, or all kids, all grades. Really looking at, did they address this need in the particular way that the data is showing. And then prioritize needs identified directly align and address the progresses and challenges identified within the needs assessment. So here it's not a general alignment, but it's direct. You can directly go A, B, C. Here was the data, here was the need, and I see how they got from point A to point B. So that's really that's the meat of the school plan, is that needs assessment and then coming up with those priority needs. Once you get to that point, then the school can start really developing their goals and strategies and looking at how they're going to implement their plan in the next year. So we have a question. Okay, we have one question. Oh, we have several questions. Okay, we're going to stop before we get to this next section, and we'll ask some questions. Okay, I'll get to that one at the end. Okay, all right, so this one, I'm going to get to these other housekeeping ones at the end, but is the ACT question applicable to elementary and middle schools? No, it is not. So if you have an elementary and middle school, you do not. There's no ACT. There's no. You could do ACT prep possibly at a middle school, but there's not going to be data. So no, that's a good flag. Can you give an example of data for technology? Okay, so the technology data is going to be if you have a one-to-one. If you're doing a one-to-one and you know where you're not there, what are you at? So data on where you're at and according to your goal. So if you have one-to-one and you're not at one-to-one, that would be data. Some other data would be if you are trying to get access to certain tools in your classroom and you don't have, not all teachers have access to the smart boards or the projectors or whatever it is that is needed, you would need to get data on that. Whatever that data is, whether it's an inventory, it's a survey, some other data would be teachers' comfort level with implementing and integrating technology into the curriculum through a survey. If you've done a survey on technology and whether or not they feel they need more training, you could identify that. So the data on technology is not really going to be much like other data where you have numbers and percentages. You're going to have lots of subjective data that you collect through surveys and inventories and gathering data in that way. Okay. If a school identifies climate in E-Plan as a top need, it should result in a goal. If the district doesn't have climate as a goal, how is that addressed in E-Plan? We'll talk about that a little bit more in the prioritized goals and strategies, but I can tell you climate will always impact achievement. So if your district has an overarching goal for ELA or math and your school has a climate issue, that climate issue is impacting achievement in ELA and math. So you could actually extend the goal for ELA and math and then extend it and say, in my school, we have to deal with climate because climate is causing our students to be absent. It's causing discipline issues that affect instruction. So that's how you would embed that. Your district does not have to have a climate goal in order to embed that. Next question is there any question concerning dyslexia on our schools report? The answer to that is no. That was a district level question and that will not be asked at the school level. Okay, the others are housekeeping, and I will get to those at the end about access to all of the information that I'm going over. So we'll continue on through prioritized goals and strategies. And so here your goals automatically roll into the school plans from the district plans, and you will extend. That's kind of what I was talking about with the school climate question. Schools have the ability and should extend the district goals and strategies to make them more specific to them. And if there is an issue where I'm thinking parent and family engagement, that is a professional development. All of those 3 priority needs that I gave as examples could be embedded under any academic goal because they all support strong academics, and they all have a positive and or negative impact depending on how good or bad they are. So you would extend the goals and strategies to make them unique to the school and so that you can use that goal, that overarching goal, to support your individualized needs at the school. Not all district goals and strategies must be extended. So there could be some goals that do not apply to a school, and if that is the case, you can mark those as NA. In a couple slides later, I'll show you how to do that, but you would mark those goals at the district level and strategies at the district level that don't apply as NA, and then you don't have to really do anything with them. Goals not marked NA must have at least one strategy, and strategies must have at least one action step. So if a goal isn't marked not applicable, you have to go through the process of ensuring you have at least one strategy for every goal and one action step for every strategy. Extending goals and strategies, this is just to give you a screenshot. I know not everybody's in this system as much as we are, so we like to try to refresh and give some information on how to do this. To the right of each goal and strategy, the school user will click Extend, and you see that in the little red box. It says Extend beside each one. When you do that, it opens up a little box, and you can then extend and give the specific district level goal. It's your own. I don't even know what word I'm looking for, but you can actually create an embedded goal within the district's goal that speaks to the specific school needs. Note that the school goal will appear in bold type so that when you go back in here, you will be able to see a bolded goal or strategy. That means that's the school's goal rather than the district's. entering text for extended goals and strategies, after you click the extend button, it'll open up this box, and then you can provide a description, performance measure, and display that information to enter the school-specific stuff. So it's really just extend and then provide your specific information for the school. If you want to check NA for goals and strategies, which you can do and you need to do if you're not going to have a strategy or an action step for a particular district level goal, if you want to mark them NA, you have to identify this by going to, at the very top, mark goals and strategies not applicable. You have to check that box. If you don't check that box, you won't even get the option to mark a goal or strategy as NA, and you're going to wonder, where is that NA? Why can't I mark it? You have to actually check this box first and tell the system that you want to mark specific goals and strategies as not applicable. When you do that, then it will open up the little boxes at the top that are identified there that allows you to say not applicable, and that will stop the system from requiring a strategy and an action step. So 2 check boxes, the one at the very top, and then it will open up individual NA boxes by each strategy and by each goal. Creating action steps, you have an option to create action steps located beneath each strategy. So every time, each goal should have at least 1 strategy, and each strategy at least 1 action step. So underneath the strategies, you'll create action steps, and that's how you build this leveled process for your goals and strategies. The goals must be aligned to priority needs. So when the district is reviewing school plans using the rubric and looking to make sure that the goals are aligned to priority needs, these are the things that would be required. School level goals must align with the district goals if the goal is not marked NA. So if the goal is NA, then there's clearly no need to align anything, but the school level goals need to align with the district goal. The goals must generally align with the progresses and challenges that have been identified and priority needs. So goals should be set in order to address priority needs. So you have to be able to see a general alignment between the extended goals that the school has created and those priority needs. And you have to have an adequate description of each school level goal with at least 1 high quality associated performance measure. Exemplars for those goals that are aligned to priority needs is the school level goals. Again, there's really no, the requirement is met, and you can't make it any better. They have to be aligned with school district goals. The goals must directly align for an exemplar. So if it's a direct alignment, you can see the A, B, C connection with those progresses and challenges and identified priority needs. That would be exemplar. And a detailed description of each school level goal with multiple high quality associated performance measures. So there's not just one way to measure towards the goal, but multiple measures. Then you go to strategies. So the schools create their goals, and then they do their strategies within each goal. Every goal has to have at least 1 strategy. So when you're reviewing strategies, the requirements are that at least 1 strategy be identified for each goal, and that the strategies show generally logical connections to the identified goal and are appropriately named. The strategies really do need to be appropriately named so that you know what they are. If the name does not have any correlation to what is happening, that would not meet the requirements. It needs to be an appropriate name, and it needs to have a logical connection to the goal. The strategy is what is being done to implement the goal. If there's no alignment, that's a problem. The descriptions must clearly and concisely state the high-level details of the strategy or change that will result from implementation of the strategy. The strategies aligned to the goals and an exemplar would be more than 1 strategy has been identified. So you have to have at least 1, but if you have more than 1, that would be above and beyond. The strategies have thorough, detailed, and logical connections. So it's really clear, the connection, it's very thorough, it's detailed, it's a logical connection. And then the descriptions are explicit and provide lots of detail, noting how the strategy will lead to changes and to achieving the stated goal. And then finally, action steps. The action steps are where the real activity is in this section of the plan. You have your goals, which are overarching. You have your strategies, which are how you think you're going to be able to meet the goal. But the action steps are the real activities that are going to take place to implement the strategy that will ultimately meet the goal. So when you're reviewing those strategies, the requirements are that at least one action step identified for each strategy. There's a general logical connection to the strategies, and they're appropriately named. Again, the naming conventions are important. They're very important as you go through and pull summaries out and look at different pieces of the plan. Descriptions of action steps are general, but include what action is to be taken, the purpose of the action, how often it will occur, the audience, the alignment to the audience, to the goal and strategy, and how it will be completed. The person responsible is identified and is appropriate. You should not have the same person for every single action step. And it shouldn't be the high level, it shouldn't be the principal for every single strategy or action step. Is the person appropriate? And then estimated dates of completion are appropriate. They are not, you're not looking at it going, well, that's ridiculous. They're never going to be able to do it in that timeline. Or that's too long. They need to be doing this well before that deadline. So looking at appropriateness of the dates. Exemplars that we would look to see is more than one action step for every strategy, a very detailed and thorough connection between the strategies and the stated focus. Descriptions of the action steps are explicit, and they have all those requirements: the action to be taken, the purpose, how often it will occur, the audience, the alignment, and how it will be completed. The person responsible is identified and appropriate. That really isn't different from the meets requirements. And then estimated dates of completion are appropriate, and not all end-of-year dates. Not everything is at the end of the year. They're varied and they're appropriate throughout the year. Benchmark indicators, these are the requirements for the benchmarks. For each action step, at least one well-developed benchmark indicator. Most of the benchmark indicators identified are generally leading, predictive indicators of the goal, and or include some output measures, such as observed change in practice. The indicators are sufficient for showing progress toward the goal, and the indicators identified are collected frequently enough to serve as leading indicators, more than once a year. Okay, so the last section of the plan is the component relationships, and this is where we get into what is required of a Title I plan. So ESSA requires Title I school-wide plans to have at least 5 components, and ESSA requirements for target-assisted schools are 6 components. These are in the law. They were in there last year. They changed from NCLB, but this is not new this year. This was all there last year. All components require a narrative response and a component relationship to one or more action steps. So the school plan components are listed in this section that is highlighted in red. The E-Plan will automatically display whatever is required for each school. So if it's a school-wide school, you'll see school-wide plan components. If it's a targeted school, you'll see targeted. If it's neither Title I or Title I targeted or school-wide, it will show nothing. If you find schools that are incorrect, you just need to let us know. You can either email me or Melissa Brown, and we can change it for you, because sometimes schools do change, so we can update that for you if you find that it's not appropriate for the school. A link to create component relationships is available under each action step in the prioritized goals and strategies section of the school plan. So to respond to plan component questions, you click on the plus next to each component. So when you go into the component section, this is a school-wide component section. It's got the 5 components, and you would click on the plus sign to enter your narrative text. When a component relationship is made, it's made, the goal, strategy, and action step titles appear under the component item. So when you make that component connection or that relationship when you're developing your goals, strategies, and action steps, they will pop up on this component page under the component that you've linked it to. So your relationships are made over in the Goals, Strategies, and Action Steps section, but they show up here in this component section. If there is no relationship made, you need to enter an explanation of how the required component has been met. So you need to do the link and you need to do the explanation. And these are the components that are required for school-wide schools. Opportunities for all students, describing the strategies to provide opportunities for all children, including all those subgroups to meet challenging state academic standards. And these components should be fairly easy for you to address, either through both through the narrative and through your action step alignment, because everything you do in your Title I school with Title I funds or with other funds academically should be designed to meet these academic standards. So that should not be difficult to meet that component. Strengthening academics, you have to describe how the school will use methods and instructional practices to strengthen the program. Again, if it's not strengthening, that means it's weakening, so I'm not quite sure why you would continue with that. So that one should be an easy one to connect a bunch of stuff to and provide a description. Quality learning, describe how the school will increase the amount and quality of learning time. That is amount and quality. So that would be your after-school, extended days, summer school, and quality of learning time could be smaller class sizes, providing an EA with a teacher in a class where there's needed more attention needed to individual student needs. It could be professional development to increase a teacher's content knowledge in a particular area. So there's a lot of possibilities there, but that's both amount and quality. Well-rounded education, that's describing how the school will provide enriched and accelerated curriculum to ensure that students have access to a well-rounded education. Every district was required to describe and define what a well-rounded education is for their district. So the schools should take from that and figure out how their school fits into that overall school district definition and talk about that. At-risk students, describe how the school will address the needs of all children in the school, but particularly those that are at risk of not meeting the challenging state academic standards. So that's really all of your RTI, your tiered interventions, your additional services after school, before school, any of those specific interventions for those students at risk would be here in that section. Your targeted assisted schools, same well-rounded requirement, strengthening academics, the same that you have to make sure that you're strengthening the program for Title I students. Regular education coordination is really how Title I and the regular education program work together. In a targeted, that's important because because most times targeted schools do a pull-out program, but we don't have very many targeted schools in Tennessee, so I'm not going to go into much detail there. Some of the other component relationships are professional development, describing how Title I supported PD is for those teachers, principals, and other school leaders is appropriate to meet the needs of those Title I students, and then parent and family engagement is talking about the strategies to increase parent engagement in the identified Title I students' instruction. Other funding and program coordination, this is the last one for targeted schools, is just how Title I funds are coordinated with other state, local, federal funds that are provided for those students. The component met check boxes after you're finished. The school plan data entry user completes and checks component met by each of the school-wide plan components. That makes sure that they're actually indicating that they have done what is necessary for each one of the components. They must do that before they're finished. Title I school-wide budget. This is another requirement for upload to the school plan. This was new last year. We started this last year, and we're continuing with it this year. All Title I school-wide schools must upload a school-level Title I budget. If the school is consolidating funds within the school-wide program, you would say yes or no. If it's a no, and these are questions that are asked in the tool, if you say no, then you upload, you enter the Title I allocation, which must match the CFA, and then you upload a school budget to match that amount. If the answer is yes, you're consolidating funds, then you identify the different programs. There's check boxes where you identify what's being consolidated, and then you would upload the Title I school-wide pool section of the CFA. And there at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that's where the school-wide budget that's highlighted in red is where you would click to identify the different school-wide budget information. Title I funds in a school-wide school must be spent in support of the school plan. So uploading this budget is of primary importance. Principals must be aware of the amount of Title I funding that is spiraled to their school, and they determine how they're going to use that money. They do the needs assessment, they answer these guiding questions, they develop goals, they develop strategies, and now they have to determine how they're going to use their federal funds, Title I funds in particular, to support those goals and identify needs that they have worked hard to identify. So this is their part in the Title I process, is to develop that budget. And so in order to do that, they need to know how much they're getting. So they need to be aware of that so that they can plan those budgets and then upload that budget as part of this plan. Title I funds that are spent in misalignment with the school plan are not allowable. There's really no way around that. That's why this budget is so important, and we've added it to the process, because a dollar spent outside of the scope of the school plan is an unallowable dollar, and you don't want to get into that situation. So schools need to be actively involved in the budgeting of their Title I funds, and it needs to be part of this uploaded document. Uploading a related document, this is where you do upload those budgets. So schools consolidating, we have some schools in the state that are consolidating. So if you're consolidating and you cannot access the school-wide pool section of the CFA, you would need to reach out to one of the LEA users and ask them to send you the PDF of the school-wide pool section of the CFA, and then that can be uploaded to related documents. If they're not consolidating, they would just upload a copy of their school Title I budget, whatever format. There's no required format. So if it's an Excel spreadsheet, if it's a Word document, if it's another document and you take a snapshot of it, it's a scanned document, it doesn't matter what format, but it does need to show the Title I funds and how they will be used. Okay. All right, we've got a couple of questions. So we'll stop here before we finish up. Okay, question. Are there any schools that do not have to complete plans, e.g. very small, non-traditional, alternative schools? Every school in the state must do a plan. Title I schools clearly have to do some additional things. School-wide schools have to do even more. But every school in the state must do a plan. Now, an alternative program, if it's a program and not a school, then no, they would not need to do a plan. But a school that is being held accountable for student academic results through the accountability system would need to do a school plan. Do we have to wait until we receive a final Title I budget or with our preliminary budget? You can do this with your preliminary budget. I would encourage that schools start working on that, and then when their budgets change, you can give them the new budget. They can update their budget and do a revision and upload the new budget, whatever process you would put in place, because again, this is a district-led process, but you can work with preliminary budgets. You do not have to wait. There was some more housekeeping ones at the top that I will get to. I think that was it. There's some more housekeeping that I'll get to at the end, but those look like the only ones related to this section. All right, so we'll finish up with E-Plan submission, review, and approval. LEA and school users viewing and editing plans. School plan users can edit the school plan for their own school. That's the only school they can edit. A school plan user can view the LEA plan and the school plan for their school, and then any approved plans within the district. But if a plan from another school is not approved yet, then a school plan user can't view that. That's come up before when we've had districts ask if they have a school that's really doing a good job with a plan and they want another school to be able to look at it and see what's being done. That isn't possible until the one school's plan is approved. Then other school users can see what's happening in that plan. But before that, they would not be able to see. LEA plan data entry users can view and edit the LEA plan and all school plans within the LEA. So as you're determining who needs what access, keep these things in mind. If you don't want someone to be able to edit, or if you want them to be able to view and edit, you need to give them the appropriate role. LEA and school users for approving plans, the school plan reviewer, which is a school level user, should be the school principal. That person reviews the school plan. That person puts the school in either plan review or returned if there's edits needed, or marks the school plan as school plan reviewer approved. And that indicates to the district that it's ready for them to review. The LEA school plan reviewer, which is an LEA level user, is a staff person responsible for the review and approval of school plans, and that's a district decision. And that person then either marks them LEA school plan reviewer approved or not approved. If there's edits needed, it would be not approved, and it goes back then to the school so they can make the necessary edits. And then if it is approved, you would mark it as such, and when the plan is done. Adding LEA and school users. LEA users are added by submitting a user access form. So if you need to give someone LEA level use, that is done through our office, and that would be Melissa Brown, and she would be able to process the TDOE user access form that you can get from TDOE resources. School users are added by the ePlan LEA user access administrator in the district. We do not handle the management and the assignment and the deletion of school level users. There's someone in your district who is the LEA user access administrator. That actual role requires the submission of the access form to us. So if you don't know who that is or you don't have someone, you need to look and see in the system. Number one, if you have someone, find that person. If they're no longer there, you would need to submit a new user access form for the person you want to designate as the LEA user access administrator for the district. That administrator has access to ePlan user admin tools and then can manage all those school users. Instructions for school user access are located in TDOE resources and the district and school planning folder. And then TDOE does not collect and maintain forms for school users. That is totally on the district to handle that process. Submitting the school plan. Once the plan entry is complete, a user with school plan data entry access must click Draft Completed from the school plan sections page, and then the principal needs to click the link for School Plan Reviewer Approved, and then the LEA user clicks LEA School Plan Reviewer Approved. So those are the 3 steps that need to take place in order for a plan to be approved. The school plan checklist. This is the checklist that we have in the system for your use. You do not have to utilize the checklist. I would recommend it. We use it as we communicate between us and you for LEA plans and for funding applications. You would have the same ability to use it to mark sections as okay or NA. If you want things changed, you would mark them attention needed. It opens up a dialog box and you can actually text in what you want changed. It'll keep track of everything for you. I would recommend using it, but again, it is not required, and it is a section of the school planning tool that is marked checklist. Verifying school plans. Once all the school plans are approved, the LEA individual responsible for approving plans must go in and verify the plans by clicking on the Update School Plan Assurances. And that will assure us that the LEA has worked with the schools in developing and approving their plans. So that's the last thing you would do when you're finished approving all plans. You would go in and update school plan assurances. Some resources that are available in TDOE resources in ePlan. We'll have the school plan template. It is a Word document that is available. It actually should be out there right now. The school plan review rubric is a Word document. It should be out there right now. I'm going to double check that when I'm finished here, but it will be done today if it's not out there. The school plan PowerPoint from this webinar, we'll put that out there. We are recording this webinar, so once we get this closed captioned, which may take us a week or so give us a little bit of time on this webinar, we'll post that there as well. You also have your CPM regional consultants. They will provide individual technical assistance as needed. They will be contacting you and advertising regional trainings on school planning and can also do them upon request. So really reach out to them for assistance and training if you need additional support. And with that, we're going to go to the questions to make sure that I've got all of them. Let's see, I have an okay, I have an alternative school in my district. It has a school number, however, it doesn't have its own accountability data. The data is reflected in our high school's data. Do they complete a plan? The answer is no, they do not, because they do not, there's really no data for that school because it is not, it's more of a program even though it has its own school number. The students' accountability and their academics data is going back to their home school. So that's where that data lives, and the alternative school would not need to do that. Questions at the top. I think we covered everything. Will this webinar be available to review again? Yes, we will post the webinar, both the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint I'll post today. The webinar, we do have to do closed captioning, so it will take us about a week or 10 days. So give us a little bit of time for that, but then you can listen to it when you need to or share it with your school users or anyone else. Are there any other questions before we close? We are 15 minutes over and I want to get you guys out of here. I think I've covered them all, so I'll give you a minute if there's anything else. Okay, there's no other questions coming in, so if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to me or your regional consultants. I would suggest you reach out to your regional consultants first. They're going to be putting training together and are prepared to answer your questions, but I'm also here as well. So thank you so much for attending today. I really appreciate it. Let us know if you need anything. Thank you so much.